Is there an ideological connection between Norway's most notorious child killer and terrorist and the most powerful office in the world? I hope not. But if there is, his name is Curtis Yarvin. Yarvin was recently profiled in the New York Times as an influential thinker on the far right and as an influence on Vice President J.D. Vance. The New York Times challenged Yarvin on something he wrote the day after the darkest day of Norwegian history, when the terrorist Anders Behring Breivik blew up the government executive headquarters and went on to massacre children at a youth camp on a small island outside of Oslo. 33 of his victims were children under the age of 18, the youngest was 13. 20 more were between the ages of 18 and 20. He shot them in cold blood. Yarvin argues that Breivik's terror was not that different from the actions of Nelson Mandela. Now, obviously this is absurd on its face. Mandela was living in a racist, repressive apartheid regime and didn't have any recourse for democratic, peaceful action. Anders Behring Breivik was living in a very well-functioning democracy and had every possibility to affect his world in a peaceful manner. He chose a bomb and violence against children. In the New York Times interview, Yarvin easily weasels his way out of this question. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. In his blog post that displays intimate knowledge of Breivik's ideological universe, Yarvin argues that Breivik was basically right, that Norway was overrun by cultural Marxists and immigrants, and that it was fair game to attack Norwegian left-wingers because, as he says, it's better to shoot at the Matador than the Cape. His main critique of Breivik is actually that the terror was ineffectual because he couldn't hope to kill all Norwegian social democrats. Not only that, but he argued that Breivik's actions made sense in the logic of war. Now, Norway has not been at war for 80 years. This was peacetime, and he was attacking children, not soldiers. Yarvin is having fun in this blog post. He's making jokes, he's being ironic, and he's writing all this the day after the terror, while parents are receiving message of their children's violent death, and while doctors are fighting desperately to save children who are riddled with bullet holes. But not once in the blog post does Yarvin reflect on the fact that these are children being killed, out of a deluded fantasy that they are somehow to blame for an imagined Islamization of Norway. And while he plays coy about Breivik's terror and argues that it was ineffectual and therefore wrong, he can think of one historical instance of terror that he finds legitimate. And what is that? The terror campaigns of the Nazi brown shirts in the 20s. The ones that led up to the Nazi regime. You know, the kind of things a Nazi would say. Norway has had many important debates after this terror attack about the dangers of right-wing radicalization and extremism. So you might imagine our shock when we see that Yarvin, who seems to be so sympathetic to Breivik, is suddenly held up as an important influencer on the far right in America. In the New York Times piece, Yarvin comes off as an affable, silly guy talking about monarchy. But it's way more dangerous than that.